The stone was cold enough to burn. Ilara pressed her fingertips against the dungeon wall and felt the frost bite into the raw skin where her claws had split from carving, too long, too deep, into the granite. The melody was almost finished. 3 bars left of the lullaby her mother used to hum, while grinding dried feverfew into paste at the apothecary table, back before the sickness took her back, before the Ashen Moor pack declared Ilara's bloodline, cursed, and threw her into this hole beneath the earth. She could smell herself. That was the worst part. Not the hunger that turned her stomach inside out every 6 hours like clockwork, not the darkness so complete she had memorized the dimensions of her cell by touch, alone but the smell. Stale sweat layered over old blood, layered over the mineral tang of wet stone. 11 days down here. She had counted by the guards' footsteps, the ones that came twice a day to slide a tin plate of cold porridge through the slot at the bottom of the iron door. Sometimes the porridge had mold on it. She ate it anyway. Her wolf stirred somewhere deep in her chest, not the roaring beast that other shifters described, but a whisper, a flicker, like a candle flame behind frosted glass. Ilara had never fully shifted. That was the official reason for her imprisonment, though everyone in Ashen Moor knew the real reason was simpler than that. Beta Commander Harlan wanted the apothecary shop the last valuable thing her mother had left behind, and Omegas without a wolf to protect them were easy to bury. She dragged her broken claw through the final curve of the last note. The lullaby was complete now, etched into the stone, in a script that was half musical notation and half something older. Something her mother had taught her by candlelight, using a language Ilara did not have a name for. The symbols looked like roots, like the vein patterns on the underside of leaves, like river systems seen from very far above. She pressed her palm flat against the finished carving and hummed. The sound that came out of her was thin, cracked the voice of a woman who had not had enough water in 4 days. But it was true. It held the melody the way a cracked bowl still holds water, if you are careful. She hummed the lullaby from beginning to end, and the vibration traveled through her palm into the stone, and the stone carried it. Stone is a good conductor of sound. Most people forget this. They think of stone as dead inert, but stone remembers every vibration it has ever absorbed, and the granite beneath Ashen Moor was old granite, the kind that ran deep into the bones of the mountain range, connected through seams and fault lines to every other stone structure for miles, including the ones 200 miles north in the capital, including the ones beneath the throne room of the Alpha King. Ilara did not know this. She was just trying not to lose her mind. Harlan came on the 12th morning. She knew it was him before the door opened, because his boots had a distinctive sound, heavier on the left, where an old war injury made him favor that leg, and because he wore a cologne that smelled like cloves, and leather too much of it the way men do when they are trying to cover something rotten underneath. Light knifed into the cell. Ilara flinched, throwing her arm over her eyes. When she lowered it, blinking through tears, Harlan was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders with a jaw like a brick, and pale blue eyes that would have been handsome on someone less cruel. He wore his beta insignia on a chain around his neck, polished to a mirror shine. Behind him stood 2 of his enforcers, and a woman Ilara recognized. Maren, the pack's record keeper, a thin woman with ink-stained fingers, who kept the ledgers for every property transfer in Ashen Moor. She would not meet Ilara's eyes. "Your mother's shop has been reassigned," Harlan said. His voice was conversational, almost bored. Pack Council voted unanimously. Given your status as an unshifted Omega with no living relatives and no mate, claim you have no legal standing to contest the transfer. Elara said nothing. Her throat was too dry for words, and besides, she had learned years ago that arguing with Harlan was like arguing with a wall. Walls do not care about your logic. Walls just stand there, Maren Harlan said, without turning around. The record keeper stepped forward, still not looking at Elara, and held out a piece of paper and a pen. The pen trembled slightly in her ink-stained fingers. "Sign at the bottom," Harlan said. "Voluntary relinquishment. Makes things cleaner." Elara looked at the paper. She could read it even in the dim light spilling through the doorway, because her mother had taught her to read before she taught her to walk, practically. The document was straightforward. It said that Elara Voss Omega of Ashenmoor voluntarily surrendered all claim to the property at 14 Thornfield Lane, including the building contents and all botanical inventory therein. She picked up the pen. Her fingers were stiff, the joints swollen from the cold and from the carving. She signed. Harlan smiled. It was the smile of a man who has gotten exactly what he wanted, and feels magnanimous enough to offer a small cruelty as dessert. "Pack Council has also voted on your continued residency in Ashenmoor," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second document. "Given that you cannot shift, cannot contribute to Pack defense, and have no family or mate to vouch for your value, you are hereby exiled. Effective immediately." Elara felt something shift in her chest. Not her wolf, though. The flicker brightened for a moment. Something older. Something that felt like the vibration in the stone when she hummed. Where she said. Her voice came out as a rasp. Harlan shrugged. "Wherever you want. The border is 3 miles east. Past that, you are no longer our problem." Maren made a small sound. It might have been a cough. It might have been something else. Elara glanced at her and saw that the record keeper's jaw was tight, the tendons standing out in her thin neck, and her ink-stained fingers had curled into fists at her sides. But she said nothing. She just stood there with her fists clenched and her eyes on the floor. And Elara understood that Maren's silence was not indifference. It was the particular silence of someone who knows that speaking up will cost them everything, and has decided with full awareness of the moral weight that the cost is too high. Elara did not blame her. She would have liked to, because anger is warmer than despair, but she could not find it in herself to blame a woman for choosing survival. They gave her 20 minutes to collect her things. She did not have many. A canvas bag with a change of clothes, both threadbare, her mother's mortar and pestle, the one made from black basalt that held the smell of 100 different herbs ground into its grain, a small leather journal filled with her mother's handwriting, recipes for tinctures and poultices, and in the back pages, those strange, root-like symbols that Elara had never been able to fully decipher, and a wooden comb with 3 teeth missing that had been her mother's before that. She walked out of Ashenmoor at noon, under a sky the colour of old pewter. No one came to say goodbye. The streets she passed through were not empty. There were people in doorways and children playing in yards, and an old man splitting wood beside the general store, but they looked through her the way you look through glass. She was already gone to them. She had been gone for years. The border was marked by a line of ancient oaks, their trunks so wide that 3 people holding hands could not circle them. Past the oaks the road turned to dirt, then to mud, then to nothing. Elara kept walking. She walked for 2 days. The first night she slept under a fallen log, curled tight against the cold, her mother's journal pressed against her chest. The second night she found a shallow cave, barely more than an overhang of rock, and built a fire from dead branches that smoked more than it burned. She ate the last of the stale bread she had taken from Ashenmoor, and drank from a stream that tasted like iron and pine needles. On the 3rd day, she reached the border of the Blackmoor territory. She knew it was the border because the trees changed. The oaks gave way to black spruce, dense and ancient, and the air carried a different weight, colder, sharper, with an undercurrent of something electric that made the hair on her arms stand up. Every shifter in the Northern Territories knew about Blackmoor. It was the seat of the Alpha King, Kyle Drakemore, and his domain stretched across 4 mountain ranges and 7 river valleys. No one entered Blackmoor uninvited. The stories about what happened to trespassers varied in their details, but agreed on the conclusion. Ilara stood at the tree line and weighed her options. Behind her, nothing. Ahead, probable death. She was so tired that the distinction felt academic. She crossed into Blackmoor. The patrol found her within the hour. 3 wolves in shifted form, massive, easily twice the size of any wolf she had seen in Ashenmoor. Their fur was dark charcoal and slate, and one pure black, and they moved through the trees with a silence that should have been impossible for animals that large. They surrounded her in a loose triangle and shifted back to human form without any apparent self-consciousness. The one in the center was a woman with close-cropped silver hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to the corner of her mouth. She wore leather armor and carried a short sword at her hip, and she looked at Ilara, the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, assessing weight and quality. "You are trespassing in Blackmoor territory," the woman said. Her voice was flat, professional. "State your name, pack affiliation, and purpose." Ilara Voss, Ilara said. She was swaying on her feet. The edges of her vision had gone grey and sparkly the way they did when she stood up too fast after not eating. "No pack. Exiled from Ashenmoor, I have no purpose. I was just walking." The silver-haired woman's eyes narrowed. She tilted her head to one side, a distinctly wolfish gesture, and inhaled deeply through her nose. Something changed in her expression. Ilara could not read what it was. "Bring her in," the woman said to the other 2. "Do not harm her. Feed her, and send word to the king." Ilara opened her mouth to ask why, but the grey at the edges of her vision rushed inward, and the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was the strange vibration in her chest again, the one that felt like stone remembering sound. She woke up in a cell. Another cell. She almost laughed, but her throat was too dry and it came out as a wheeze. This cell was different from the one in Ashenmoor, though. The stone was dry, the air was warm, and someone had placed a wool blanket over her. On the floor beside the narrow cot was a wooden tray with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a ceramic cup of water. Ilara drank the water first. Then she ate the bread slowly, because her stomach had shrunk to the size of a walnut, and she knew from experience that eating too fast after days of hunger would make her vomit. The bread was good. Dark rye, dense, and slightly sweet with a crust that crackled when she broke it. The cheese was sharp-aged, the kind that left a sting on the back of the tongue. She ate every crumb. The cell had a window, small barred set high in the wall, but through it she could see a slice of sky and the top of a stone tower. The stone here was different from Ashenmoor's granite. It was darker, almost black, with veins of silver running through it like frozen lightning. She pressed her hand against the wall and felt it hum. Not hum like a machine, hums. Hum like a tuning fork, hums. Like the wall was vibrating at a frequency just below the threshold of hearing a frequency that matched something inside her. She closed her eyes and hummed the lullaby. The sound traveled through the stone. She could feel it go the way you feel, a letter leaving your hand when you drop it into a mailbox, a small, releasing a sending. The vibration passed through the wall and into the bones of the building, radiating outward through corridors and stairwells and foundations, through the bedrock beneath, carried by those silver veins, like current through a wire. 2 floors above, and 3 corridors to the east in the throne room of the Alpha King, the sound emerged from the stone, like water rising from a spring. Kyle Drakemore was mid-sentence when he heard it. He was standing over a map table with his war council, 4 men and 2 women in various states of armoured readiness, discussing the movement of rogue packs along the southern border. The map was covered in small carved figures, representing troop positions, and Kyle had just picked up one of the figures, and was about to place it on a ridgeline when the melody reached him. He stopped. His hand froze in the air, the carved figure suspended between his thumb and forefinger. The melody was faint, barely audible, like hearing music through a wall of water, but it was clear enough to follow. A lullaby. Simple haunting, built on intervals that did not belong to any musical tradition he recognized. The notes seemed to spiral, each one turning back on the one before it, like the growth pattern of a fern. His wolf, the massive, ancient thing that lived in his chest like a second heart, surged forward so hard that Kyle staggered. In 29 years, his wolf had never done that. His wolf was disciplined, controlled a weapon he wielded with precision. But now it was throwing itself against the inside of his ribs like a caged animal, and the word it was howling, the one word it had never spoken before, was mate. "My king," said General Aldrich, the oldest member of the War Council, a man with a grey beard and steady hands, who had served Kale's father before him. "Are you well?" Kyle set the carved figure down on the map. His hand was trembling. He flexed his fingers and made it stop. "Where is the woman?" he said. His voice came out lower than he intended, rougher, with an edge that made everyone in the room go very still. "The one the Southern Patrol brought in." Aldrich's eyebrows rose. "The trespasser. She is in the lower holding cells awaiting processing. Captain Rayner's report said she was an exiled Omega from Ashenmoor. No pack, no wolf malnourished, and—" Kyle was already moving. He crossed the throne room in 6 strides, his boots ringing on the black stone floor, and the double doors swung open before he reached them, because the 2 guards posted there had enough survival instinct to recognize that their king was not going to slow down for a door. The War Council looked at each other. Aldrich sighed, collected the map figures carefully, and began putting them back in their case. Kyle took the stairs 3 at a time. He was a big man, 6'4", broad, through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of dense musculature that came from a lifetime of shifting and fighting, rather than from any gym. His hair was black, cut short on the sides, longer on top, and his eyes were the color of dark amber, almost gold, with vertical pupils that appeared when his wolf was close to the surface. They were appearing now. The lower holding cells were 4 flights down, through a corridor lit by iron sconces that cast long shadows on the black stone walls. Kyle could hear the melody more clearly here. It was coming from the 3rd cell on the left. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard, and it was destroying him. Each note pulled something out of his chest, some wall he had built so slowly over so many years that he had forgotten it was there. And the fact that it was crumbling now in a damp corridor that smelled like old straw and iron hinges struck him as absurd. He stopped outside the cell door. The melody stopped at the same moment, as if whoever was inside had sensed him. His wolf was going insane. There was no other word for it. The beast was pacing in circles inside his skull, whining, snarling, demanding that Kale open the door, that he find the source of that sound, that he put his teeth on her neck and never let go. Kyle gripped the door frame hard enough that the stone cracked under his fingers. He breathed. Pine resin and cold water. That was the scent coming through the iron door. Pine resin and cold water, and underneath it, buried but unmistakable, the sharp green smell of crushed herbs, feverfew and comfrey, and something else, something that did not have a name, something that smelled the way moonlight would smell, if moonlight had a scent. He opened the door. She was standing in the center of the cell, with her back against the far wall. Small. That was his first thought. She was small and thin, and her hair was matted, and her clothes were filthy, and her fingers were bloody at the tips. The claws cracked and splitting, and she was looking at him with eyes the color of rain-washed slate grey with flecks of silver, and those eyes were absolutely terrified. His wolf dropped to its belly inside his chest. Just like that. The snarling stopped, the pacing stopped, and the great beast that had made grown alphas stumble backward in fear simply lay down and pressed its muzzle to the ground. Kyle had never felt anything like it. Submission. His wolf was submitting to this woman, not because she was stronger, but because she was the one. The only one. Kyle stood in the doorway and did not move. He was afraid that if he moved, he would cross the cell in 2 steps and gather her up against his chest and bury his face in her hair. And she was looking at him like she expected to be killed, and he would cut off his own hands before he gave her another reason to be afraid. The lullaby, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. He had to fight to keep it there because his wolf wanted to roar. Where did you learn it? Ilara stared at him. She knew who he was. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew what the Alpha King looked like, and the reality was both better and worse than the descriptions. Better because the descriptions focused on his size and his scars and his reputation for brutality, and none of them mentioned the way his amber eyes softened when he looked at her as if she were something precious he had been searching for. Worse because his presence filled the cell like a physical force, heat and gravity, and the smell of cedar smoke and iron and something darker, wilder, the musk of a wolf so powerful it made her own flicker of a beast cower, and then strangely rise. My mother, Ilara, said. Her voice cracked. She taught me. Before she died. Kyle's jaw tightened. He could see everything. The malnutrition, the bruises fading from green to yellow on her arms, the way she held herself. Shoulders curved inward, chin down, the posture of someone who had spent years making herself as small as possible. He could see the blood on her fingertips and the scratches on the stone wall behind her. And when he looked at those scratches, the symbols carved into the granite, his wolf made a sound he had never heard it make before. Recognition. Who did this to you? He said. He was not asking about the cell. He was asking about all of it. Every scar, every bruise, every day she had spent, hungry and afraid, and his voice had dropped to a register that was not entirely human. Ilara shook her head. It does not matter. It matters to me. 3 words. She felt them land in her chest, like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples outward through her whole body. Her wolf, that tiny flicker she had carried her entire life, like a candle she could never quite coax into a full flame, surged. Not surged like his wolf had surged, not with violence or demand, but like dawn. A slow brightening. A warmth that started in her sternum and radiated outward until her fingertips tingled, and the throbbing pain in her cracked claws faded, and the terrible exhaustion that had been dragging at her bones for days lifted just enough that she could stand up straight. She straightened her spine. It was a small movement. She did not realize she had done it until she saw something change in his face. I am going to take you out of this cell, Kyle said. He spoke slowly, carefully, the way you speak to a wild animal you do not want to spook. I am going to have someone bring you food and clean clothes, and a room with a bed and a door that locks from the inside. And then when you are ready, I would like to hear that lullaby again. Why, Ilara whispered. Kyle looked at her. The amber in his eyes was molten liquid, and behind it his wolf lay still, watching her with an adoration so fierce it made his bones ache. Because I have been listening for it my entire life, he said. I just did not know what I was listening for until now. He stepped back from the doorway. He did not enter the cell. He stood to one side and left the path clear so she could walk out on her own terms under her own power. And that single gesture, the restraint of a man powerful enough to take whatever he wanted, choosing instead to wait, choosing to give her the door, cracked something open inside Elara that she had bricked shut a long time ago. She walked out. They gave her a room on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, a room with a window that looked out over the Black Moor Valley, all dark pines and silver rivers and mountains whose peaks disappeared into clouds. The bed had a feather mattress and linen sheets and a wool coverlet dyed deep blue. There was a bathing room attached with a copper tub and hot water that came from pipes fed by a natural hot spring somewhere beneath the castle. There was a wardrobe with 3 dresses in it, simple but well made, in sizes that were close enough to hers that someone must have estimated by looking at her. Elara locked the door from the inside. She listened to the latch click. Then she sat on the bed and pressed her hands to her face and breathed. She bathed. The hot water turned grey, then brown, then grey again as layers of grime dissolved. She scrubbed her hair 3 times with soap that smelled like lavender and tallow. She cleaned her cracked claws carefully, wincing, and wrapped her fingertips in strips of linen she tore from a cloth beside the tub. She dressed in the smallest of the 3 dresses, a dark green one with long sleeves that covered the bruises on her arms. She combed her hair with her mother's wooden comb, working through the tangles with patience, and when she was done, she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, and did not recognize the woman looking back. Not because she had been transformed. She was still thin, still pale, still scarred, but her eyes were different. There was something in them that had not been there 12 hours ago. A brightness, a question, a knock at the door. Elara opened it and found a tray on the floor, placed there by someone who had already retreated down the corridor. Roasted chicken with rosemary and sea salt, roasted root vegetables glazed in honey, fresh bread with butter, a pot of mint tea. She carried the tray to the small table by the window and ate every bite, slowly tasting everything. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, and the sky was turning colors she did not have names for: rose gold, bleeding into violet, bleeding into a blue, so deep it was almost black. She pressed her hand against the window glass and felt the stone of the window-sill hum beneath her palm. She did not hum back. Not yet. She was not ready. 3 days passed. Elara did not leave her room. Food appeared outside her door 3 times a day, always warm, always varied, always enough. No one knocked. No one demanded anything. She slept 14 hours the first day, 12 the second, 10 the third. Her body was relearning what it felt like to be safe, and the process was slow and disorienting, like blood returning to a limb that has been numb. On the 4th morning, she opened her door and found Kyle sitting in the corridor outside it. He was on the floor, his back against the opposite wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him, reading a leather-bound book. He was wearing a simple black tunic and trousers, no armor, no crown, nothing that marked him as a king, except for the way he took up space effortlessly, as if the corridor had been built to contain him. When she opened the door, he looked up, and the expression on his face was so carefully neutral that she knew it had to be costing him something enormous to maintain it. "Good morning," he said. "Have you been sitting there all night?" Elara asked. He closed the book. "No. I came at dawn." He paused. "I came yesterday, too. And the day before." Something turned over in her chest. "Why?" Kyle looked at her directly. "Because my wolf will not let me be anywhere else." He said it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment, the way you might say, Because the sun rises in the east. I understand that you are afraid. I understand that you have been given no reason to trust anyone, much less a man with more power than you. I am not asking for your trust. I am asking for your time. Ilara leaned against the doorframe. The dress hung loose on her frame, but the green brought out the silver in her eyes, and Kyle had to look away for a moment, because the sight of her standing in a doorway, clean and fed and whole, with morning light catching the damp ends of her hair, made his wolf keen with a joy so sharp it was indistinguishable from grief. I will walk with you, Ilara said, but I need to show you something first. She led him down to the lower holding cells. The guards let them pass without a word. When they reached the cell where she had been kept, Ilara pushed open the iron door and gestured to the wall. Kyle stepped inside and looked at the carvings. His breath stopped. The entire back wall of the cell was covered in them. Not just the lullaby, though. That was there running across the center like a spine, but hundreds of other symbols spiraling outward from the melody in patterns that were organic and mathematical at the same time. They looked like root systems, like neural networks, like the branching patterns of rivers seen from above. And they were glowing. A faint silver-blue luminescence, barely visible in the dim light of the corridor, but unmistakable. I do not know what they are, Ilara said quietly. My mother taught me the melody and some of the symbols, but she died before she could explain them. I have been carving them since I was a child, into stone, into wood, into the dirt. They come out of me like breathing. I do not decide to make them. They just appear. Kyle reached out and touched one of the symbols. The moment his fingers made contact, the glow brightened, and a sound filled the cell, low and resonant, like the deepest note of a pipe organ, played through water. His wolf threw its head back and howled, and the howl harmonized with the sound from the stone. And for a moment, the cell was full of music. He pulled his hand back. The glow faded. The sound stopped. "Do you know what these are?" Ilara asked. She was watching his face. Kyle looked at her. His amber eyes were wide, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked shaken. Not frightened. Awed. "These are stone songs," he said. His voice was rough. "My grandmother told me about them. They are the language of the first wolves, the ones who came before packs, before territories, before any of this. She said the stone singers died out centuries ago, that the bloodline was extinct." Ilara's hand went to her mother's journal, tucked into the pocket of her dress. She carried it everywhere, the way some people carry a talisman. "My mother was a village apothecary," she said. "She mixed herbs and set bones and delivered babies. She was not anything special. They told me she was not anything special." Kyle turned to face her fully. In the confined space of the cell, he was very close enough that she could smell cedar smoke and iron and the warm animal scent underneath, and close enough that she could see the thin scar that ran from his right eyebrow to his hairline, and the way his pupils had gone to vertical slits, his wolf pressing close to the surface. "Ilara," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. Her mother was a stone singer. The last one. "And so are you." He held out his hand. Not demanding, not grabbing. Just held it out, palm up, the way you offer your hand to something wild. "My grandmother also told me that every stone singer has a mate," he said. "One person whose wolf resonates with the frequency of the stone. One person who can hear the song across any distance, through any barrier." She said that when a stone singer finds that person, the stone itself sings louder. Ilara looked at his hand. It was large, scarred across the knuckles, calloused from sword work and perfectly steady. She did not take it. Not yet. I need time, she said. Kyle closed his hand, slowly, lowering it back to his side. He nodded once. You have all the time in the world, he said. And Alara, his voice dropped to something quiet and ferocious. Whoever told you your mother was not special, lied. And whoever put those bruises on you will answer for it. Not today. Not because I want revenge. Because they do not get to mark you and walk away as if it costs nothing. That is not how this works. He turned and walked out of the cell, and Alara stood alone in the dim glow of her own carvings, and pressed her hands against the stone, and felt it singing. Over the following weeks, Alara began to move through the castle. Slowly at first, keeping to the quieter corridors, learning the layout the way she had learned the dimensions of her cell in Ashenmoor, by feel and by repetition. Blackmoor Castle was enormous, a sprawling structure of black stone and silver-veined granite that had been built into the side of a mountain over centuries. It had a library that occupied an entire floor, a kitchen complex that employed 30 people, training grounds where warriors sparred in both human and wolf form, and an infirmary that was, she discovered, woefully understocked. She found the infirmary on her 6th day. The head healer was a gruff, overworked man named Brennan, with a permanently furrowed brow and hands that shook slightly from years of performing surgery under pressure. His shelves held the basics: willow bark for pain, garlic poultice for infection, poppy extract for severe injuries, but whole categories of treatment were missing. No feverfew for migraines, no comfrey root for bone mending, no arnica for deep bruising, no yarrow for blood stanching beyond basic pressure bandages. Alara stood in the doorway of the infirmary and looked at those bare shelves, and for the first time since leaving Ashenmoor, she felt something other than survival. She felt purpose. Your stores are inadequate, she said. Brennan looked up from the wound he was stitching on a warrior's forearm. The warrior, a young man with a split lip and sheepish eyes, flinched more at Brennan's expression than at the needle. "Who are you?" Brennan said, in the tone of a man who has been bothered one too many times today. Alara Voss. Apothecary trained. My mother was a healer. I know 47 preparations for field medicine alone, and you do not even have calendula salve for burn treatment. Brennan stared at her. Then he looked at the shelves. Then he looked back at her. "Show me," he said. She did. Within 3 days, she had reorganized his entire storage system, identified 6 local plant sources within walking distance of the castle that he had not been harvesting, and prepared a batch of comfrey and honey poultice that healed the young warrior's split lip in half the time Brennan's standard treatment would have taken. Within a week, warriors were coming to the infirmary, specifically asking for the new healer, the small one with the cracked claws, and the quiet voice, who somehow knew exactly where the pain was, before you told her. Kyle watched from a distance. He did not hover. He did not assign guards to follow her, though every instinct in his body screamed at him to surround her with protection. He gave her space the way you give a river space, not because you do not care about the river, but because you understand that a river that is dammed stops being a river. But he was always nearby. At meals, he sat at the far end of the great hall and ate without looking at her, except when she was not looking at him. And then he looked at her, the way astronomers look at something they have spent their entire career searching the sky for. In the corridors he passed her with a nod and a murmured good morning that contained beneath its surface a gravitational pull so strong it made her teeth ache. In the evenings when she hummed in her room while reviewing her mother's journal, he stood 2 corridors away, with his palm pressed against the stone wall, and listened, and his wolf lay quiet and full inside his chest. The War Council noticed. General Aldrich noticed first, because General Aldrich noticed everything. "She is your mate," Aldrich said one evening when they were alone in the strategy room. Kyle did not look up from the map. "Yes." "And you have not claimed her?" "No." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. He had known Cale since the boy was 7 years old, since the day Cale's father had died in battle, and the crown had passed to a child who was too young to understand what it meant, but old enough to feel the weight of it settle on his shoulders like a stone. Aldrich had watched that boy become a man, a warrior, a king, and in all that time he had never seen Cale hesitate. Not once. "She is afraid," Cale said. He was staring at the map, but his eyes were not focused on it. "She has been hurt by people who had power over her, and I have more power than anyone she has ever met. If I claim her now, she will not know if she chose me or if she simply could not say no. And I will not build this on that." Aldrich studied his king for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Your father would have been proud of you," he said. "He would have claimed her on the spot, mind you. He was an impatient man. But he would have been proud of you for being better than he was." Kyle's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. The message from Ashenmoor arrived 6 weeks after Ilara's exile. It came by formal envoy, a nervous young beta in travel-stained clothes, who presented himself at the gates of Blackmoor Castle with a sealed letter bearing the insignia of the Ashenmoor Pack Council. The letter was addressed to the Alpha King and was signed by Beta Commander Harlan. Kyle read it in his study. Ilara was not present, but she learned later what it said. The letter was polite in the way that weapons are polite when they are sheathed. It explained that a former Omega of Ashenmoor, one Ilara Voss, had been lawfully exiled for failure to contribute to pack welfare, and that it had come to Harlan's attention that she may have taken refuge in Blackmoor territory. The letter respectfully requested her return, as certain property matters remained unresolved, and her signature on additional documents was required. Kyle read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully, set it on his desk, and walked to the infirmary. Ilara was grinding dried yarrow in her mother's basalt mortar and pestle when he appeared in the doorway. She could tell something was wrong immediately. Not because his face showed it. His face was the controlled mask he wore for everyone who was not her, but because the stone beneath her feet was vibrating at a frequency she had come to associate with his wolf, and the frequency was different. It was sharp, angular, angry. Ashenmoor sent a letter, he said. Ilara's hands stilled on the mortar. The smell of dried yarrow, dusty and faintly bitter, filled the silence between them. "What do they want?" she asked. "You." A single word. He said it without inflection, but the stone beneath their feet hummed louder, and in the corridor behind him, a hairline crack appeared in the wall. Ilara set the mortar down. There were things she hadn't told him, things about the property transfer, about Harlan, about the real reason she had been exiled. She had not told him, because she was not sure he needed to know, and because the habit of keeping quiet, of making herself small, of not being a burden, was so deeply embedded in her that it felt like a survival mechanism, which it was. "The apothecary shop was my mother's," she said. "My inheritance. Harlan wanted it. He fabricated charges, locked me in the dungeon until I signed the property over, then exiled me so I could not contest it." Kyle's expression didn't change. His eyes did. The amber went dark, and the vertical pupils dilated until there was almost no iris visible, just black, and Ilara could see the wolf in him, not pressing forward, but consuming, filling him up from the inside, until the man and the beast were the same thing. "He fabricated charges," Kyle repeated. "I never committed a crime. I was an Omega. I had no wolf to defend me." That was enough. Kyle was silent for a long time. When he spoke, His voice was very calm, which was how Elara knew it was very dangerous. "I am going to respond to this letter," he said. "I am going to do it diplomatically, because you deserve to see this resolved through proper channels, not through violence, even though violence is what I want. But I need to tell you something first, and I need you to hear it as a statement of fact, not as a claim on you. You are my mate, Elara. My wolf knew it the moment your lullaby reached the throne room. I have known it every day since. And because you are my mate, Ashen Moor's treatment of you is not a small pack dispute. It is an act of aggression against the Black Moor crown. That changes the legal standing of everything Harlan did to you. Everything." Elara looked at him. The man standing in her infirmary doorway, filling it with his shoulders and his carefully controlled fury, had just handed her a weapon. Not a weapon of violence, a weapon of legitimacy. Under wolf law, crimes against an Alpha King's mate were crimes against the crown. It meant that Harlan's property theft, her false imprisonment, her exile, all of it could be tried, not as internal pack business, but as treason. She had not asked for this. She had not asked for any of this. But she understood, standing there with dried yarrow dust on her fingertips and her mother's mortar in front of her, that accepting it was not the same as surrendering. It was choosing a different kind of strength. "I am not ready to be claimed," she said carefully. "I know. But I am not leaving." Something happened in his face then. The mask cracked just for a moment, and underneath it was something raw, something young, something that looked like a boy of 7, trying to hold up a crown that was too heavy for him. And for one breath, Elara saw the loneliness that lived at the center of all that power, and it matched her own. Then the mask was back, smooth and controlled, and he nodded. "I will have Aldrich draft the response," he said. "You should review it before it is sent. This is your fight. I am simply making sure you have the ground to fight it on." He turned and left, and the crack in the corridor wall quietly sealed itself, the stone knitting back together as the vibration faded. Cale's response to Ashen Moor was delivered by a delegation of 12 warriors, 6 in human form and 6 in wolf form, all of them wearing the black and silver of the Blackmoor crown. The response was 3 sentences long. "Elara Voss is under the protection of the Blackmoor crown. Any claims against her person or property will be adjudicated by the King's Court. Beta Commander Harlan is summoned to Blackmoor to answer for his actions. Failure to appear will be treated as contempt of the crown." Harlan appeared. He arrived 2 weeks later with a retinue of 6 Ashen Moor warriors and the thin, ink-stained record-keeper Maren, who carried a leather case full of documents pressed against her chest like a shield. Elara watched them arrive from the infirmary window. She had not seen Harlan since the day he exiled her, and the sight of him, tall, broad, confident, wearing his beta insignia on that polished chain, made her stomach clench with a nausea that had nothing to do with hunger. Her wolf, the flicker that had been growing steadily brighter over the past weeks, pulled back inside her chest, retreating the way a flame retreats from wind. Then Cale stepped out onto the castle steps below her window, and the flame steadied. He was wearing his formal armor. Black plate with silver, inlay a crown of black iron, set with a single amber stone, and a cloak of dark fur that moved like water when he walked. His war council flanked him, Aldrich on his right, Captain Rayner of the Southern Patrol on his left, and behind them 20 of Blackmoor's finest warriors in formation. Harlan dismounted his horse and looked up at the Alpha King. To his credit, Harlan did not show fear. What he showed was worse. He showed the casual deference of a man who believes he is dealing with a formality, a man who has already decided that this is a minor inconvenience that will be resolved with the right words and the right documents. Alpha King Drakemore Harlan said with a bow that was precisely deep enough to meet protocol, and not a fraction deeper. "I am honored by the summons. I trust we can resolve this misunderstanding quickly." The Omega Elara Voss was lawfully exiled by the Ashenmore Pack Council, and any property transfers were conducted with her voluntary consent. I have the documentation here. He gestured to Maren, who stepped forward and opened the leather case. Kyle did not look at the documents. He looked at Harlan. He looked at him for a long time, long enough for the silence to shift from awkward to uncomfortable to something else, entirely. Something that made 2 of Harlan's 6 warriors take involuntary steps backward. "You imprisoned a woman with no charges," Kyle said. His voice was level conversational the way the surface of deep water is level. "You starved her until she signed away her inheritance. You exiled her into the wilderness in winter, with no provisions. You did all of this because she was an Omega with no wolf, and you believed no one of consequence would notice." Harlan's smile flickered. "With respect, Alpha King internal pack disciplinary matters are. She is my mate." The words fell into the courtyard like stones into a well. Elara, watching from the window 3 floors up, heard them clearly. So did everyone else. The courtyard went silent. Even the horses stopped moving. Harlan's face did something complicated. The color drained from it, in stages, starting at his cheeks and working inward, leaving him the grey-white of old candle wax. His confident posture disassembled itself piece by piece, the squared shoulders dropping, the lifted chin, lowering the hands that had been clasped behind his back, coming forward to hang at his sides. "I did not," he began. "You did not know," Cale finished. "No, you did not. Because it would not have mattered to you if you had. You did not imprison and starve and exile Elara because of who her mate might be. You did it because you believed she had no one. You looked at a woman alone and saw an opportunity, and the fact that she happened to be bonded to me is not what makes your actions wrong. It is simply what makes them my business." Harlan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Behind him, Maren set the leather case down on the ground. She straightened up. She looked directly at Kyle, and the expression on her face was one Elara recognized, the expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just been told they can put it down. "The property transfer documents were forged," Maren said. Her voice was clear and did not shake. "She signed under duress after 11 days without adequate food or water, and I witnessed the coercion firsthand. I have a separate record of the True Pack Council vote, which was split, not unanimous, as Commander Harlan reported. 3 council members voted against the exile, but were overruled by Harlan's casting vote, which he held illegally, since the Beta Commander does not have casting authority under Ashenmore's charter." She reached into the leather case and pulled out a different set of documents, ones that Harlan had clearly not known she was carrying. Harlan turned to look at her. "Maren," he said. His voice was quiet. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 2 months ago," Maren said. She did not look at him. She looked at the flagstones of the courtyard, and her ink-stained fingers tightened on the documents. And for a moment, just a moment, her composure cracked, and something terrible moved across her face, guilt and relief, and something that looked like grief for the version of herself that had stood silently in a dungeon doorway and let a woman be robbed of everything she had. Kyle took the documents from Maren. He read them. Then he looked at Harlan with those amber eyes, and the wolf behind them was not submitting now. "Beta Commander Harlan of Ashenmore," Kyle said, "you are charged with false imprisonment, coerced property transfer abuse of office, and exile under fraudulent authority. Under Crown law, these charges carry a sentence of imprisonment and forfeiture of rank." He paused. "And under Wolf law, the penalty for harming an Alpha's mate is decided by the Alpha." Harlan's hand moved toward his sword. One of Kyle's warriors had it off his hip before his fingers touched the hilt. Kyle descended the steps. Each footfall was deliberate, measured the approach of a predator that does not need to rush because its prey has nowhere to go. He stopped in front of Harlan close enough that the beta had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "I am not going to kill you," Kyle said. "Elara would not want that. She is a healer. She puts things back together. That is who she is. And I will not dishonor what she is by tearing you apart, no matter how much my wolf is begging me to." He leaned in closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper that the stone of the courtyard somehow carried to every ear present. "But you will spend the rest of your life knowing that she was the one who saved you, the woman you starved, the Omega you threw away. She is the reason you are still breathing. Live with that." He straightened. "Take him to the cells," he said to Captain Rayner. "The same cell he put her in. Let him learn how it feels." Rayner's scarred face showed nothing but something satisfied glinted in her eyes as she led Harlan away. Elara came down from the infirmary. The courtyard was still full of people, warriors and staff, and Ashenmoor's remaining delegation, who looked various shades of relieved and terrified. She walked through them without stopping her green dress, moving around her thin frame, her cracked claws wrapped in linen, her mother's journal in her pocket, and she walked straight to Maren. The record-keeper flinched. Elara took her hands. Maren's fingers were cold and trembling and stained with ink that had seeped into the creases of her knuckles over years and years. "Thank you," Elara said. Maren shook her head. She tried to speak, and could not. Tears were running down her face in 2 straight lines, and her mouth was working around words that would not come, and Elara understood that what Maren needed was not forgiveness, because forgiveness implied that what had happened was forgivable, but acknowledgement that the cost of silence had been paid in a currency Maren would be counting for the rest of her life. Elara squeezed her hands once and let go. Then she turned to Kyle, who was standing at the base of the steps, watching her with that expression that was not neutral, that had never been neutral, that was simply everything contained in a space too small for it, like trying to fit a thunderstorm into a jar. "You told them," she said. "I told them that I am your mate." "Yes. I had not agreed to that." "I know." Elara looked at him. The courtyard was silent around them, dozens of eyes watching, and the stone beneath their feet was humming with a frequency that only 2 people present could feel. "You should have asked me first," she said. Kyle nodded. "You are right. I should have? Why did you not?" "Because he was going to walk away," Kyle said. "He was going to present those forged documents and use the law to validate what he did to you, and the only legal standing that prevented that was the mate bond. I made a tactical decision. It was the right decision for the outcome, and the wrong decision for you, and I am sorry. It was possibly the least romantic thing anyone had ever said to a mate in the history of wolf-kind. It was honest and blunt, and acknowledged the exact thing that Elara feared, that his power could override her choices, that love and control could wear the same face, and it was the moment she decided to trust him. Not because of what he said, because of the apology, because men who truly believed they had the right to decide things for you didn't apologize for doing it. They justified. They explained. They told you it was for your own good. They did not stand in a courtyard full of their own warriors and say the words, 'I was wrong.' Take me to the library," she said. "I need to see what you have on stone singers." Kyle looked at her. The mask cracked again, wider this time, and what came through was not loneliness or grief, but something helpless and luminous, the expression of a man who has been bracing for a blow and has received a gift instead. "Follow me," he said. The library was vast, 3 stories of shelves carved from the same black stone as the castle, connected by wrought-iron spiral staircases, with reading alcoves set into the walls at intervals, each one fitted with a lamp and a writing desk. The collection was ancient, thousands of volumes in leather and cloth, and some in materials Elara did not recognize, thin sheets of bark scrolls of cured hide tablets of clay. Kyle led her to a section on the 2nd level, where the shelves were older and the books were fewer. He pulled down a volume, bound in grey leather, that had gone soft with age, and opened it to a page marked with a silk ribbon. "This is the only written account of stone singers in the Blackmore Library," he said. "My grandmother bookmarked it before she died." Elara took the book. The pages were handwritten in a script. She recognized the same root-like symbols that filled her mother's journal, interspersed with passages in the common tongue. She scanned the common tongue sections, reading quickly. The stone singers were a lineage, not a pack, a family of wolves whose gift was not physical strength or speed or size, but resonance, the ability to communicate with stone at a frequency that could carry messages, heal fractures in rock and bone alike, and in the most powerful practitioners, reshape the physical world through sound. The gift was passed through the maternal line and appeared only in those who carried the full bloodline. For centuries, the stone singers had served as mediators between packs, their ability to send messages through stone, making them invaluable as neutral communicators in times of conflict. They had been hunted to extinction 300 years ago, or nearly so. The account described a purge organized by a coalition of alpha packs who feared the stone singers' growing influence. The singers could send messages through stone that no one else could intercept or decode. They could heal wounds that should have been fatal. In the hands of a wartime alpha, a stone singer was a strategic weapon without equal, and the coalition decided that the safest course was to ensure no one could wield that weapon at all. Elara read the passage 3 times. Then she closed the book and looked at Kyle. "My mother knew," she said. "That is why she hid. That is why she lived as a village apothecary in a minor pack and never told anyone what she was. She was not pretending to be ordinary. She was surviving." "Yes," Kyle said. "And that is why Harlan wanted her shop. Not for the property, for what was inside it." Kyle frowned. "What do you mean?" Elara pulled her mother's journal from her pocket and opened it to the back pages, the ones filled with the root-like symbols she had never been able to decipher. In the library's lamplight, the symbols on the page seemed to pulse, faintly resonating with the symbols in the book, as if they were 2 instruments tuning to the same key. "My mother's journal," Elara said. "It contains the complete notation for stone songs I have never heard. Dozens of them. Healing songs, warding songs. Songs that can communicate across distances. Songs that can—" She trailed off. She had reached a page near the very end of the journal, one she had looked at many times before, without understanding it. But now, with the context from the library book, the symbols resolved into meaning like a word you suddenly recognize in a foreign language. "Songs that can break a bond," she whispered. Kyle went very still. "Not our bond," she said, quickly looking up. "Not the mate bond. A different kind." She traced the symbols with her fingertip, reading them slowly. "A subjugation bond. A forced bond. The kind that an alpha can impose on an unwilling wolf to compel obedience. This is a song that can break it." The implications unfolded in the silence between them. In a world where alpha wolves could force compliance through their command voice, a song that could break that compulsion was not just powerful. It was revolutionary. It was the reason the stone singers had been hunted, not because they could send messages or heal wounds, but because they could free wolves from the control of their alphas. Kyle sat down on the reading alcove's bench. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, His voice was steady. "You understand what this means," he said. "It means I am dangerous. It means you are the most important person in the Northern Territories. And it means that when word gets out, and there are alphas who will want you dead, and alphas who will want you controlled, and very, very few who will want you free." He looked at her. "I want you free," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever you decide to do with this power, it is your decision. I will protect your right to make it. Even if you decide to leave. Even if you decide to use it against me." "I would not use it against you," Ilara said. "I know. But I needed to say it, so that you know the offer has no conditions." Ilara sat down beside him on the bench, not touching, but close. Close enough that the warmth of his body reached her through the air between them, and the stone of the alcove sang quietly around them, a duet between the wall and the floor, harmonizing with the beat of her heart. "I am going to learn these songs," she said. "All of them. And then I am going to teach them to anyone who carries the bloodline, if anyone else still does. And if no one else does, then I will write them into the stone of this castle," she said, "so they outlast me." Kyle turned his head and looked at her, and his amber eyes were soft, and his wolf was so still and so full that his chest ached with it. "The stone of this castle is yours," he said. "All of it. As long as you want it." Ilara looked at him for a long moment. Then she held out her hand palm up, the same gesture he had made in the dungeon cell weeks ago. He took it. His hand was warm and rough and large enough to close around hers completely, and the moment their skin made contact, the stone of the entire library exhaled. There was no other word for it. Every wall, every shelf, every step of the wrought iron staircases resonated at once a single sustained chord that was felt more than heard, passing through the foundation and into the bedrock, and out through the mountain, a vibration that carried for miles through every stone structure in the Blackmoor territory, through every fault line and seam and silver vein, until it reached the ancient oaks at the Ashenmoor border, and rattled the acorns in their caps. In the dungeon below, Harlan felt the stone of his cell wall vibrate against his back, and did not understand what it meant. In the courtyard, General Aldrich paused mid-step and pressed his hand against the castle wall, and smiled. In the infirmary, Brennan looked up from his mortar and pestle, and frowned, then shrugged, then went back to grinding willow bark. And in the library, Ilara and Kyle sat side by side on the bench, and held hands, and said nothing, because the stone was saying it for them. The weeks that followed were the most productive and the most dangerous of Ilara's life. She spent her mornings in the infirmary, where her reputation had grown from curiosity to indispensability. Warriors who had lived with chronic pain from old wounds found relief in her preparations. A child with a bone that had set wrong was healed completely when Ilara hummed a low frequency, while setting the splint, the bone knitting true under the vibration. Brennan, who had been skeptical of everything for 40 years, as a matter of professional principle stopped being skeptical of Ilara specifically, which was the highest compliment he had ever paid anyone. Her afternoons she spent in the library decoding her mother's journal. The work was slow, painstaking each symbol, unlocking a fragment of meaning that connected to other fragments in a web of increasing complexity. She began to understand that the stone songs were not just melodies. They were a language, one that described the fundamental structure of the physical world in terms of resonance and vibration, and the symbols were its written form, a notation system for frequencies that human ears could barely perceive, but that stone could carry forever. Her evenings she spent with Kyle, not always speaking. Sometimes they walked the battlements in silence, looking out over the valley as the sun set. Sometimes she hummed, and he listened, his palm pressed to the wall, feeling the music through the stone. Sometimes they sat in his study while he worked through correspondence, and she worked through the journal, and the only sound was the scratch of his pen and the whisper of turning pages. He had not touched her since the library. Not once. She had taken his hand that day, and he had held it, and then he had let go when she let go, and he had not reached for her again. He was waiting. She could see the cost of it in the tension of his jaw when they stood close, in the way his hands fisted at his sides when she laughed at something, and the sound made his wolf keen in the way he always positioned himself between her and the nearest door, an unconscious protective geometry that he could not have stopped if he had tried. She was falling in love with him. She knew it the way she knew the lullaby in her bones, in the frequency of her heartbeat, in the way the stone hummed differently when he was near. But the fear was still there. Not of him, of the pattern, of what it meant to need someone when every person she had ever needed had either died or betrayed her. The crisis came without warning. Elara was in the library alone, deep in a passage about warding songs, when the door opened and a man she had never seen walked in. He was tall, lean, with white blonde hair and eyes the color of glacier ice, and he moved with the fluid grace of a wolf who had spent more time in shifted form than human. He wore traveling clothes dusty from the road, and he smelled like snow and pine pitch and something metallic copper or blood, she was not sure which. "Elara Voss," he said. He smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. "My name is Corvin Ashfall. I am the Alpha of the Western Range Pack, and I have come a very long way to meet you." Elara's wolf retreated so sharply that she gasped. Her hand went to the journal instinctively, protectively. "I do not know you," she said. "No," Corvin agreed. "But I knew your mother." The words hit Elara like cold water. She stared at him. Corvin pulled a chair out from one of the reading desks and sat down, crossing one leg over the other, perfectly at ease, in a castle that was not his, in a library that belonged to a king who could tear him apart. "Your mother was Lyra Voss," he said. "Born Lyra Ashfall, my father's sister." Elara's mind raced. Her mother had never spoken of family. No siblings, no parents, no pack of origin. She had told Elara that she was an orphan alone in the world, and Elara had believed her because why would a mother lie about something like that? "She lied to protect you," Corvin said, as if reading her thoughts. "Our family was Stone Singer bloodline. When the purge happened, my father and your mother split up. He went west. She went east. He changed his name, but kept the bloodline knowledge alive in secret. She changed her name and hid entirely. Different survival strategies, both effective until recently." "What do you mean, until recently?" Corvin's smile faded. "I mean that someone has been hunting Stone Singer descendants again. 3 members of my pack with the bloodline have disappeared in the last 6 months. Taken in the night. No bodies, no ransom, no trace. And then I heard a rumor that the Alpha King of Blackmoor had taken in a mate who could sing to stone, and I thought either that is my cousin or the world has become very strange." Elara's hand tightened on the journal. "Who is hunting them I do not know yet. But I know they are organized, well-funded, and motivated by something more than fear. The original purge was about control, about preventing Stone Singers from liberating wolves from alpha commands. This is different. This feels like collection. Someone is not killing singers. Someone is taking them." The library door opened again, hard this time, slamming against the stone wall with a crack that made the lamplight shudder. Kyle filled the doorway, and his face was the face of a man whose wolf had sensed an unfamiliar alpha, within 100 feet of his mate. "What is happening?" Kyle said. His voice was low and pressurized, the vocal equivalent of a blade being drawn. Corvin stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Alpha King Drakemore. I apologize for the intrusion. I am Corvin Ashfall Alpha of the Western Range, and I am your mate's cousin." Kyle's eyes went to Ilara. She nodded. The tension did not leave him, but it rearranged itself, settling into alertness rather than aggression. He entered the library and closed the door behind him. "Talk," he said. Corvin talked. He laid out everything he knew about the disappearances, the timeline, the pattern, the absence of evidence. He described the 3 missing wolves, their ages, their Gehorts, the stone singer abilities they had exhibited. One could locate underground water sources by humming. One could diagnose illness through the vibration of a patient's bones. One, the youngest, a girl of 17, could send messages through stone over distances of up to 50 miles. All 3 were taken within their pack territory, Corvin said. All 3 at night. All 3 from locations near significant stone formations. Whatever is hunting them uses the stone network to find them. Uses the stone network, Ilara repeated. Her face had gone pale. Yes. Your mother's lullaby, the one you carved into the dungeon wall in Ashenmoor. It travelled through the stone to this castle. That is how your Alpha heard it. But stone carries vibrations in all directions. If someone else is listening to the network, they heard it too. The implication settled over the room like frost. They know where I am, Ilara said. They have known for weeks, Corvin said, which is why I came as fast as I could, because whoever is collecting stone singers is coming here next, and they are coming for you. Kyle moved, not toward Corvin, not toward the door, toward Ilara. He crossed the library in 3 strides and stopped in front of her closer than he had been in weeks, close enough that she could see the amber flecks in his eyes, and the muscle jumping in his jaw and the scar above his eyebrow, and the way his chest was rising and falling with controlled breaths. "No one is taking you," he said. "Not from this castle. Not from this territory. Not from me." Ilara looked up at him. She could feel his wolf, enormous, ancient, furious, pressing against the inside of his skin like a storm against a window, and she could feel her own wolf responding, not retreating this time, not flickering, but burning. Bright and steady and answering. "I know," she said. And then, because the time for waiting was over, and the stone was singing so loudly that the books were trembling on the shelves, she reached up and put her hand against his chest over his heart. The stone resonated. Every wall, every shelf, every stair. The hum built to a chord, and the chord built to a wave, and the wave travelled outward from the place where her palm pressed against his heartbeat, through the castle, through the mountain, through the silver veins in the bedrock, carrying a frequency that was both a declaration and a warning. "I am here. I am his. Come for me at your cost." Kyle made a sound. It was not a word. It was something deeper. Something his wolf pushed up through his vocal cords. A sound that was recognition and relief and possession and tenderness all tangled together. His hands came up and hovered at her waist, not touching, still waiting, even now. Ilara took his wrists and placed his hands on her hips. "I choose you," she said. "I am choosing you. Not because of the bond. Not because you are the safest option. Because you stood outside my door for 3 days and did not knock. Because you apologized when you could have justified. Because you offered me freedom even when it meant I might leave. I choose you, Kyle." He pulled her against his chest. His arms closed around her, and his face dropped into the curve of her neck, and he inhaled pine resin and cold water and crushed herbs, and his whole body shuddered once, with the effort of restraint finally releasing, and his wolf settled into his bones like a river finding its bed. They stayed that way for a long moment. Corvin, leaning against the reading desk with his arms crossed, had the decency to look elsewhere. Then Kyle lifted his head. "We need to prepare," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "Corvin, tell me everything about how they took the others. Every detail. We have work to do." The attack came 3 nights later. They were ready. Kyle had fortified the castle in ways both conventional and unconventional. The conventional defenses included doubling the perimeter patrols, sealing the lower tunnels, and positioning archers on the high towers. The unconventional defenses were Ilara's. She had spent 2 days carving warding songs into the foundation stones of the castle. Her claws, which had healed under the influence of good food and the steady hum of the mate bond, were strong, now stronger than they had ever been, and the symbols she carved were more complex and more powerful than the ones she had scratched into the Ashenmoor dungeon wall. These were not the lullaby. These were fortress songs, patterns that resonated at frequencies designed to disrupt the stone network around the castle, creating a dead zone that would prevent anyone from using the silver veins to locate or communicate within the walls. Corvin had shown her how. His knowledge of stone singing was different from hers, rougher, more practical, learned from fragments and oral tradition rather than from her mother's systematic notation. But he understood the defensive applications in ways she didn't. And together, they had designed a warding pattern that turned the castle's own geology into a shield. They came at midnight. 12 of them, all in wolf form, all larger than any wolves Corvin or Cale had seen outside of alpha bloodlines. They came from the east through the mountain pass, moving in a formation that spoke of military training and single-minded purpose. They were not a pack. Corvin confirmed this with a shake of his head when he saw them from the high tower. No pack markings, no alpha insignia, no identification of any kind. They hit the warding zone, and the first 3 went down immediately, writhing on the ground as the disruptive frequency tore through the stone beneath their paws. The remaining 9 split into 2 groups, 6 heading for the main gate, and 3 peeling off toward the eastern wall where the stone was thinner. Kyle met the 6 at the gate. He shifted on the steps of his own castle, and the wolf that emerged was enormous, black as the stone of the walls, with amber eyes that blazed in the torchlight. The Blackmoor warriors shifted around him, forming a wall of fur and teeth and controlled ferocity, and the fight was brutal and short. But the 3 at the eastern wall were not fighters. They were diggers. They hit the wall at its thinnest point and began to tear through it with claws that glowed with a sickly green light, cutting through Ilara's ward symbols like acid through paper, and the breach opened in less than a minute. Ilara felt it. She was in the infirmary where Kyle had told her to stay where the wards were strongest, but she felt the breach like a note gone sour in a chord, a wrongness that vibrated through the soles of her feet and up her spine. She ran. She should not have. She was not a fighter. She had no weapons training, no wolf to shift into no physical capability beyond a thin woman's desperate speed. But the ward was her work, her song, and the breach was a wound in it, and every instinct she had, the wolf, the singer, the healer, drove her toward the break. She reached the eastern wall and found one of them already inside. A wolf grey and scarred with those green glowing claws standing in the rubble of the breach. It saw her and lunged. Ilara opened her mouth and sang. Not the lullaby. Not a healing song. Not a ward. Something that came from a place deeper than memory, deeper than her mother's teaching, deeper than the journal. A sound that was the stone itself, given voice, a frequency that was not harmonious, but discordant, a note that said no. in the language of the earth. The wolf hit an invisible wall 2 feet in front of her. The sound shattered the green glow on its claws like glass, and the animal screamed a sound that was half howl and half something disturbingly human, and collapsed on the rubble, shuddering, its claws returning to their natural dark color. The other 2 came through the breach behind it. Ilara sang louder. The sound filled the corridor, bounced off the walls, was amplified by the silver veins in the stone, until it was not one voice, but a chorus, and the 2 wolves dropped to the ground, beside the first, writhing, their green-lit claws flickering and dying. Then the song took something out of her. The last note cost her everything she had left, every calorie, every ounce of strength, every reserve she had built up over weeks of food and safety and healing. She felt it go like blood from a wound, and her knees buckled, and the floor rose to meet her. And the last thing she saw before darkness closed in was the silver veins in the stone glowing bright, brighter, brightest, as if the castle itself was reaching for her. She woke in Kyle's arms. He was on the floor of the corridor, his back against the wall, holding her against his chest. He had shifted back to human form and was wearing blood on his arms and shoulders, and a cut along his ribs that was still seeping, but he did not seem to notice. His amber eyes were fixed on her face, with an expression that was not the mask, was not the control, was not anything except terror, raw and unguarded, the terror of a man who has come very close to losing the only thing that matters. "She is breathing," Brennan said from somewhere above them. His gruff voice was strained. She exhausted herself. She needs rest, food, and time. Not necessarily in that order, Ilara Kyle said. His voice cracked on her name. She lifted her hand slowly because her arm felt like it was made of wet paper, and pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart. "Still here," she whispered. His arms tightened around her. Not possessively, protectively. The arms of a man who understands the difference. The green-clawed wolves, it turned out, were not wolves at all. When Corvin examined them in the holding cells, he found that they were human mercenaries who had been forcibly bonded to wolf spirits through a process that was essentially the dark inverse of the mate bond, a subjugation bond applied not to wolves, but to humans, giving them wolf form and enhanced abilities, but at the cost of their free will. The green glow was the visible signature of the bond. Ilara's discordant song had shattered it, returning the mercenaries to their human forms and their own minds. They were confused, terrified. One of them, a young man, barely out of his teens, wept when he realized where he was and what he had done. He remembered nothing of the months he had spent as a weaponized wolf. He remembered being approached by a man in a market town, offered money for manual labor, and then a pain in his neck like fire, and then nothing until he woke up on the floor of a castle corridor, with a woman's voice ringing in his ears. Kyle questioned them gently with Ilara present. The young man and the 2 others had all been bonded against their will by the same individual, a man they described as older with white hair and pale eyes, and a scar across his throat. He called himself the Collector. Corvin's face went hard. "I know who that is," he said. "His name is Edric Vale. He was my father's contemporary, a stone singer who turned. He figured out how to corrupt the bonding songs to use them for subjugation instead of liberation. The Purge 3 centuries ago was not organized by alphas. It was organized by him. He convinced the Alpha Coalition that stone singers were a threat, then used the chaos of the Purge to eliminate every singer who could have exposed what he was doing. He has been collecting the survivors ever since using them to power his corruption network. 300 years, Ilara said. How is he still alive? The subjugation bonds extend his life, Corvin said grimly. Every bond he maintains feeds him. Every singer he captures gives him access to more of the stone network. He is not just a man anymore. He is a parasite embedded in the geology of the northern territories like a worm in the root of a tree. Then we find him and we kill him, Cale said. Corvin shook his head. You cannot kill him with claws or swords. He exists in the stone network as much as he exists in a body. To kill him, you would have to sever him from every bond simultaneously and collapse every node of the network he controls. Only a stone singer can do that. Ilara looked at her hands. Her claws had fully healed now, and they were longer than they had been before, sharper, darker at the tips, as if the song she had sung during the attack had changed something fundamental in her. I can do it, she said. She did not feel brave. She felt a cold clarity, the clarity of a woman who has spent her whole life running from something and has just turned around and seen it clearly for the first time. But I need to be at the heart of the network, where it converges, beneath the Ashenmoor dungeon, Corvin said, where you carved the Lullaby, the oldest stone in the region, the deepest granite, the place where the silver veins are most concentrated. That is where he anchored the network 3 centuries ago. Your mother knew. That is why she settled in Ashenmoor. She was not hiding. She was standing guard. The room was silent. Your mother lived her entire life on top of that monster, Corvin said quietly, and she never told a soul, because she knew that drawing attention to it would put you at risk. She chose to be ordinary so you could survive. Ilara pressed her mother's journal against her chest. The leather was warm from her body heat, and the symbols on the pages inside it pulsed faintly, waiting. Then we go to Ashenmoor, she said. Kyle looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that this could be the end, that the stone network might consume her, that Edric Vale was 3 centuries old and embedded in the geology of the world, and she was one woman with a cracked journal and a lullaby her mother had hummed while grinding herbs. Together, Kyle said. It was not a question. Together, Ilara agreed. They marched on Ashenmoor with 200 Blackmoor warriors, Corvin's Western Range wolves, and General Aldrich's grim blessing. The journey took 4 days, and on each night, Ilara sat apart from the camp and hummed into the stone of the ground, listening to the network, tracing its threads, learning its architecture, the way a surgeon studies an anatomy chart before cutting. The network was vast. It stretched for hundreds of miles, a web of corrupted resonance, anchored at nodes where the silver veins converged, and at the center beneath the Ashenmoor dungeon, she could feel him. Edric Vale. A presence in the stone that was cold and ancient and aware like a heartbeat made of ice. He spoke to her on the 3rd night. She was alone, her palm flat, on a granite outcropping, and his voice came through the stone like water seeping through a crack. Little singer, he said. The voice was cultured, patient, amused. I have waited a long time for you. Ilara did not flinch. She had expected this. You killed my mother, she said. No. Your mother died of natural causes. I did not need to kill her. She was guarding a door she could never open, and I was already on the other side. But you little singer, you can open it. You can do what she never could. I felt it when you shattered my soldiers' bonds. Such raw power, such waste using it for destruction when it could be used for so much more. More, Ilara said. Like enslaving people, like Order Edric said, like control. The world is chaos, child. Wolves tear each other apart over territory and mates and pride. Stone singers were meant to be the architects of something better, not healers grinding herbs in village shops, not prisoners rotting in dungeons, rulers, shapers, gods of the stone. There was a silence. Then Ilara said something that surprised even herself. "You sound lonely," she said. The stone was quiet for a long time. "I have not spoken to another singer in 87 years, Edric said, and for one moment the cultured patience cracked, and what came through was exactly what Ilara had named. Loneliness. The kind that eats through a person, the way water eats through stone, slowly, invisibly, until there is nothing left but the shape of what was once there. Then the mask was back. "Come to Ashenmoor, little singer. Come open the door. I will teach you everything your mother could not." "I am coming," Ilara said. "But not for your lessons." She pulled her hand from the stone, and the connection severed. She sat in the dark for a long time, shivering not from cold, but from the ghost of that loneliness, which was, she realized, not so different from her own. They reached Ashenmoor on the 4th day. The pack surrendered immediately. Without Harlan, their military structure had collapsed, and the sight of 200 Blackmoor warriors and a pack of Western Range wolves marching up their main road eliminated any thought of resistance. Ilara walked through the streets of Ashenmoor for the 2nd time. The first time she had been invisible. This time every eye was on her. She walked past the general store where the old man had been splitting wood and ignored her. He was not splitting wood today. He was standing in his doorway with his hat in his hands, and the expression on his face was not contrition, because you cannot feel sorry for someone you never saw in the first place. It was confusion. He was trying to reconcile the thin woman in the green dress with the invisible Omega who had walked past his shop 2 months ago, and the math was not working. Ilara did not stop. She walked to the dungeon entrance, the same one Harlan had marched her into 11 weeks ago, and she descended the stairs. Kyle was beside her. Corvin was behind them. The stone grew darker as they descended, and the silver veins in the walls grew brighter, pulsing with a frequency that was not Ilara's, not her mother's, not any singer's. She recognized. It was Edric's. She could feel him getting closer with every step, his presence in the stone growing stronger, colder, more oppressive, like walking into a freezer that stretched to the center of the earth. They reached the cell. Her cell. The carvings were still there, the lullaby and the surrounding symbols glowing faintly blue-silver against the dark granite. But the glow was wrong now. It was being consumed at the edges by something green, the same sickly green as the mercenary's claws, creeping inward like mold on bread. "He is corrupting my work," Ilara said. She pressed her palm against the wall, and the stone screamed. There was no other word for it. The frequency that came through her hand was anguished, a sound of stone being forced to vibrate at frequencies that violated its nature, and it hurt it. Physically hurt pain, lancing through her hand and up her arm and into her chest. She pulled her hand back. There was a burn mark on her palm, a perfect circle of angry red. Kyle caught her wrist and looked at the burn. His jaw was set so hard, the muscles stood out like cables. "You do not have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the journal. She opened it to the last page, the one with the breaking song, and she read through the notation one final time. Then she closed the journal and handed it to Cale. "If something happens to me," she said, "give this to Corvin. He will know what to do with it." "Nothing is going to happen to you." Ilara looked at him. "Cale, if something happens to me." He took the journal. His hand closed around it, so tightly that his knuckles went white. Ilara pressed both palms against the carved wall. The pain came immediately, the green corruption biting into her skin. But she held on. She closed her eyes and began to sing. The breaking song started low. lower than the lullaby, lower than the healing songs, lower than any sound she had made before. It was a note that lived in the basement of human hearing, felt more than heard a vibration that started in her diaphragm and travelled down through her arms and into her palms and into the stone. The silver veins brightened. The green corruption hissed. "You cannot win this," Edric's voice said through the stone. He sounded less amused now. "I have been part of this network for 3 centuries. You have been singing for weeks." Elara sang louder. The breaking song climbed, rising through frequencies like a staircase, each note targeting a different node of Edric's network, each vibration designed to sever a connection. She could feel them breaking one by one, like strings snapping on an instrument, and with each break, a wave of released energy surged through the stone. And somewhere in the world, a subjugation bond shattered, and someone who had been a puppet became a person again. Edric screamed, not with his voice, with the stone. The entire dungeon shook granite dust raining from the ceiling, and the green corruption surged, pushing back against her song, trying to drown it, to silence it, to consume the singer the way it had consumed the stone. Elara's strength was failing. She could feel herself being drained, the song pulling energy from her body faster than she could sustain it. Her vision greyed at the edges. Her legs trembled. The burn on her palms spread, climbing past her wrists toward her elbows, and the pain was extraordinary, a white-hot fire that consumed everything. Then she felt a hand on her back. Large, warm, steady. And through that hand, a frequency she recognized. Not stone. Not a singer's gift. A wolf's heartbeat. Kyle's heartbeat, strong and deep and absolutely unwavering, resonating with hers through the contact of his palm against her spine. She was not alone. The realization hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds, and with it came something the journal had not described, something her mother had never had, because her mother had been alone, guarding a door she could never open. The mate bond was not just a connection between 2 wolves. It was a resonance, a frequency, a tuning that amplified everything the singer was. Kyle's wolf was an amplifier. His heartbeat was the foundation note that her song needed to reach the depths where Edric had buried himself. Elara sang the final bar of the breaking song, and Kyle's wolf howled behind her, not through his mouth, but through his bones, through his blood, through the hand pressed against her back, and the 2 sounds merged and multiplied, and the silver veins in the stone blazed white, and every subjugation bond in the network shattered at once. The green corruption evaporated, the stone stopped screaming, the shaking stopped, and deep in the bedrock in a cavern that no one had entered in 3 centuries, something that had once been a man and had become something worse crumbled into dust that the stone absorbed without a sound. Elara's knees gave out. Kyle caught her before she hit the floor, lifting her against his chest, and the last thing she heard before she lost consciousness was the stone singing. Not screaming, not burning. Singing. The lullaby, her mother's lullaby, carried by silver veins through the bedrock of the world, free and clean, and whole for the first time in 300 years. She woke in the room with the blue coverlet and the window that looked out over the Blackmoor Valley. The light was golden, late afternoon. She had been unconscious for 2 days, Brennan told her when he came to check on her. The burns on her palms had healed, replaced by silver-white marks that glowed faintly, like tattoos made of light. Kyle was in the chair beside her bed. He had been there for the full 2 days, Brennan also told her, with the tone of a man reporting a fact he found medically annoying, but personally understandable. "The burns are gone," Elara said, flexing her fingers. "Not gone," Kyle said. "Changed." He took her hand and turned it, palm up. The silver marks spiraled across her skin in patterns she recognized root-like organic, the same patterns as the symbols in her mother's journal. She was marked by the stone, literally inscribed. What happened to Edric? She asked. He is gone. Corvin confirmed it. The network is clean. Every bond he maintained is broken. The mercenaries are human again. The 3 singers he captured from the western range were found alive in the cavern beneath Ashenmoor, disoriented, but whole. Corvin is bringing them here. Here, Elara repeated. Kyle looked at her. If you will have them. Corvin suggested that Blackmoor could become a sanctuary, a place where singers can train, learn the old songs, rebuild the lineage. He paused. He said your mother would have wanted that. Elara closed her eyes. She thought of her mother grinding feverfew in a basalt mortar, humming a lullaby that carried through stone standing guard over a monster for 20 years, without ever telling her daughter why choosing ordinary so her child could survive. She thought of Maren, who had stood in a doorway and said nothing, and then stood in a courtyard and said everything. She thought of Harlan in his cell, learning the dimensions of punishment by touch. She opened her eyes. There is something I want first, she said. Kyle waited. I want you to mark me, Elara said, properly, in front of your pack. I want them to know that I chose this, not because I was frightened into it, or because you rescued me, or because the mate bond compelled me, because I am a stone singer, and you are the wolf who heard my song, and this is what I want. Kyle looked at her for a long time. The amber of his eyes was molten liquid, and his wolf was pressed so close to the surface that she could almost see it behind his face, enormous and ancient and trembling with a joy so vast it had no name. When he said, "Now would be fine," he almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched, and his eyes softened, and it was the most beautiful expression she had ever seen on a human face, because it was completely unguarded, a man's soul visible through his eyes for one unprotected moment. The marking ceremony took place at sunset on the battlements of Blackmoor Castle. The entire pack was present, 400 wolves in human form standing on the walls and in the courtyards, and on the towers, silver armor catching the last light. General Aldrich stood as witness. Captain Rayner stood as honor guard. Corvin, who had arrived that morning, with 3 dazed but living stone singers, stood as family. Elara wore a dress the color of midnight, one she had chosen herself from a selection brought to her room, and her feet were bare on the black stone of the battlements, because she wanted to feel the castle beneath her when this happened. Her hair was loose, still damp from the bath, and the silver marks on her palms glowed faintly in the fading light. Kyle wore black. No crown, no armor, no insignia. He had chosen to stand before his pack as a man, not a king, because the choice Elara had made was not about power. It was about resonance. He looked at her across 3 feet of ancient stone, and his amber eyes were bright, and his wolf was perfectly still for the first time in its life. And he said nothing because there was nothing in any language that could hold what he was feeling. The stone said it for him. The battlements hummed, the towers sang, the entire castle vibrated with a chord that was the mate bond made audible, 2 frequencies becoming one, and 400 wolves felt it in their bones, and knew that what they were witnessing was not a ceremony, but a truth. Kyle stepped forward. He lowered his head to the curve of her neck, where her pulse beat against her skin, and he pressed his mouth there gently, and then his teeth, and the mark he left was not a wound. It was a signature. The pain was brief and bright, and what replaced it was warmth, a deep, pervasive warmth that started at the mark and radiated outward through her entire body, and Elara felt her wolf finally, fully, irrevocably ignite. Not a flicker. Not a candle. A bonfire. A blaze that filled her chest and poured through her veins and lit up the silver marks on her palms until they shone like small moons. Her wolf howled silently joyfully, and the sound travelled through the stone of the castle and out through the mountain and into the bedrock, and every silver singer's carving in every stone she had ever touched glowed bright in the darkness. Kyle lifted his head. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. Elara reached up and touched his face. Her thumb traced the scar above his eyebrow, the one she had memorized weeks ago from across library tables and battlements and carefully maintained distances. "I heard you," she said. "Through the stone, through everything. I heard you before I knew what I was hearing." He turned his face into her palm and pressed his lips against the silver marks. On the wall behind them, General Aldrich cleared his throat and blinked several times, and pretended it was the wind in his eyes. Captain Rena stood at perfect attention and let 2 tears roll down her scarred face without wiping them. Corvin watched his cousin burn with silver light and felt the stone beneath his feet, singing a song he had almost forgotten, a song his father had hummed to him as a child, a song that meant home. 400 wolves raised their voices as one. The howl shook the mountains. It carried across the valley and over the rivers and through the forests, and in every territory it touched, wolves stopped what they were doing and listened, because the sound was not just celebration. It was announcement. It was warning. It was the Alpha King of Blackmoor, and the last stone singer, bound and burning and unbreakable. Elara pressed her forehead against Kyle's chest and listened to his heartbeat through his ribs, and beneath that, through the stone. Beneath her feet, she heard her mother's lullaby, carried by silver veins through the bones of the world, singing her home. Weeks later, on a quiet morning in the Blackmoor infirmary, Elara was teaching a young stone singer, one of the 3 Corvin had rescued, how to read the notation in her mother's journal. The girl was 17, wide-eyed with calloused hands from years of manual labor, and a voice that could make quartz crystals vibrate in harmony. Her name was Wren. This symbol means sustain. Elara said, pointing to a root-like figure that curved back on itself. You hold the note until the stone responds. It is a conversation, not a command. You listen as much as you sing. Wren hummed the note. The stone of the infirmary wall shimmered, and a hairline crack in the mortar between 2 blocks sealed itself. Elara smiled. From the doorway, Kyle watched. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, and his amber eyes were soft. He did not interrupt. He had learned that watching Elara teach was one of the great pleasures of his life, right alongside listening to her hum and arguing with her about infirmary supply budgets, which she always won. Brennan appeared beside him, drying his hands on a cloth. "She has reorganized my entire dispensary again," Brennan said. "Is it better?" Brennan made a noise that was simultaneously an admission and a complaint. The old healer glanced at Kyle, then at Elara, then back at Kyle. "Your father Brennan said." He paused. "Your father would not have waited. He would have claimed her on the spot. So I have been told. But she would not have chosen him. Not the way she chose you, and the stone would not have sung. It does not sing for possession, only for resonance." Kyle looked at the old healer, surprised. Brennan shrugged. "I have been in this castle for 40 years, he said. I pay attention to the walls." He walked away, and Kyle stood in the doorway and watched his mate teach a girl to sing to stone, and the castle hummed around them, warm and whole, and outside the first snow of winter was falling on the Blackmoor Valley, and each flake that touched the black stone of the battlements melted into music.